This is BBC World News. I'm Rajesh Merchandani. Coming up in a few minutes, we'll have World Have Your Say. But first, let me give you the latest headlines. There's been more shelling of rebel-held areas in the Syrian capital, Damascus. At the same time, that UN weapons inspection team is bringing its mission to a close. The British Parliament have voted to rule out any military response to last week's poison gas attack, but the French say they will still back military intervention. India's economy is growing at its slowest rate since the global economic crisis of 2008. India's GDP was up by just 4.4% in the first quarter of this year. That's less than expected. The Prime Minister, Manmohan Singh, has asked people in the country to brace themselves. A suicide bomber has killed a district governor and 6 other people in northern Afghanistan. 74. He'd been ill in recent months. Among his many plaudits in 1995, he was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. OK, I'll be back in an hour with the latest news, but first let's hand it over to Ros Atkins and we'll have your say.
Rajesh, thank you very much indeed. Well, the conflict in Syria is continuing today, but we know that Britain and Germany will not be taking military action. France and the US, though, say it remains an option. We're going to be live in Washington, D.C., in Moscow and in Manchester to discuss whether a military intervention in Syria can play a positive role. I also wonder, were you impressed by the decision those British MPs took in the House of Commons? Do let us know. You can get in touch. This is the phone number. Here's our Twitter and Facebook. And remember, we're live here on BBC World News, so wherever you are, you can take part right now.
Talking about it. Top priority. My experience. This is chaos. People are going to want to know.
Let's just say something.
If you're tweeting as you watch us here on BBC World News, the hashtag is WHYS. Let's start the programme with the moment, a dramatic moment in the House of Commons on Thursday evening, which changed the dynamic of a possible military intervention in Syria.
The ayes to the right, 272. The noes to the left, 285. Yeah!
And with that, British MPs from across the political spectrum had sent David Cameron a message. They had voted against the principle of military intervention in Syria. Of course, that doesn't mean it won't happen, but Britain is not going to be involved. Let's meet our first guests who are joining us live from around the world. In Washington, D.C., we have Hayvi Bouzo, a Syrian-American activist and journalist. Live from Moscow is Natalia Antonova, who's acting editor-in-chief of the Moscow News. That's an English-language website. And Tara Hewitt's also joining us. She's a political blogger in Manchester. Let me ask the two of you who aren't in Britain, do you think British people should be proud of the decision their MPs took? Perhaps, Hayvi, I could start with you.
Yes, of course. I mean, obviously, as a Syrian American, I would be happy that Britain is not going to be part of any future possible military operation against the Syrian regime. But in Syria, and even throughout the Facebook, Twitter, people in Syria were admiring the democracy that the British have. And I have total respect for that, and that's exactly what we want to have in Syria. And
what about you, Natalia?
Well, I don't know if pride should necessarily figure into this. I mean, it's like it was said, it's a moment for democracy, I guess. Sometimes they vote one way and another time they'll vote a different way. It's just, you know, you have to respect the decision that was made just then.
What about you, Tara? Did the news make you proud?
I'm afraid I can't agree with that comment. I mean, here in the UK, we've got a proud history of standing up for some of the vulnerable people around the world. And I think last night we actually shattered that reputation, and actually it was quite shaming to be British and watching that on TV. We're seeing our MPs actually debating a different topic. They were debating Iraq and actually weren't looking at the vulnerable people that are suffering in Syria.
Well, Tara, Natalia and Hayvi, stay there. We're going to come back and speak to you in a moment. For a moment, though, let's shift to the world's newsroom and join Chloe and a number of guests, including Lena Sinjab, who we normally speak to in Damascus, where she's our correspondent. Lena, I wonder if you think the British vote will have gone down well in the city.
Well, of course, as we've seen the situation in Syria, there are always split views between opponents and loyalists to President Bashar al-Assad. The loyalists to the president are cheering and very happy that Britain has opposed a military intervention, but for the opposition and the majority of them who have been affected by the violence practiced by the government over the last 2 years, they feel bitter that Britain had failed them. However, the focus for them in these crucial hours of the Syria crisis is to focus on the US's movement and what they are going to do next. And they're hoping, and many of them are hoping, that the US will continue with the military intervention to put an end for the ongoing violence mainly practiced by regime forces.
And Lena, it's interesting just to intervene there. You use the word failed. Some Syrians feel failed, a strong word that they're coming out with.
Yes, indeed. If you look back at the crisis, it's been almost more than 100,000 people have been killed. The government have used Scud missiles, warplanes, and all sorts of different violence. And the rebels are also responding with similar, some sort of violence too. But the world didn't do anything for them. And now, with the chemical weapons only, with the chemical weapons used, now the world is wanted to move. But Britain, who has taken a strong stance supporting the opposition, supporting their call for freedom and democracy, yet the population here represented by the parliament did not want to help them using military means. However, for many people in Syria, amongst the opposition, they would have hoped that Britain, the United States and France would pressure Russia to put an end for the violence. Russia, the main ally for President Assad, and would ask President Assad to leave and start a political process. But after 3 vetoes at the Security Council and after many stances by Russia in support of President Bashar al-Assad, for many people in Syria, they feel that there is no other way. So this is the worst solution for them.
It's interesting you talk about BBC Russia. We will speak to our colleagues from the BBC Russian service a little later on. But let me introduce you to Engin now, who's from BBC Turkish. We heard there from Lena, many Syrians feeling failed. The Turkish government firmly behind military action at the moment.
Yes, today the Turkish Foreign Minister Ahmet Davutoğlu made a statement about Syria crisis, and he said that they had certain evidence about the chemical attack, and he emphasized that the firing angles and firing mechanisms show that the Syrian regime is behind the attack. And the Syrian regime killed many civilians. And he insisted that they had gathered these intelligence reports by their own intelligence officers. And he's expecting that the UN inspectors will show the same conclusion. We showed the same findings today.
Engin, thank you very much indeed. Chloe, Lena too. I was only jumping in there because I know that we've made a connection to our studio in Damascus and we must make the most of that. Bsam Abdullah joins us. He's director of the Damascus Centre for Strategic Studies. He's also an advisor to the government. Sir, thank you for your time today. What was your reaction to the vote in the British Parliament?
My reaction is that we welcome the logic decision of the British Parliament, which reacting the atmosphere in London or in Britain, because I have talked to many TVs and radio in Britain or through BBC, and I noticed that there is no support absolutely to this war or to this attack. I think that the war, nobody behind it. If we will notice that what our colleague mentioned from Turkey, I was in Turkey for years and I know the situation there. Ahmet Davutoğlu, I'm sorry to tell you, they are lying and they want to escape their heads because they failed in their foreign policy and they want, and the war is in their interest. Generally, I think that the wind should down and now it's a complicated situation for United States, for President Obama. I want to mention what was in Britain before this decision of the Parliament, which I think in front of me, the Joint Intelligence Organization report, which was in Britain published through BBC website, which is very important to mention that they depend in many cases on the open sources. This war, I think, nobody will support, and the British people and the European people and American including, they should study and took lessons from Iraqi war, and I think they don't need to read again Baker Hamilton report.
Bsam Abu Abdullah, let me just interrupt you to make a couple of points. You're quite right, there was a lot of opposition to military intervention at this point. There are, though, a minority of Britons who do support that option right now. Let me just introduce you, sir, with Hayvi Bouzo, who's a Syrian-American activist in Washington, D.C. Hayvi, I wonder what you would like to say to Mr. Abu Abdullah, a government advisor in Damascus.
Well, obviously, he works for the Syrian regime, whose a bloody dictatorship has been killing the Syrian people for over 40 years now. The last 2.5 years were just obviously on a larger scale. I think that the British people and even the people in the United States have not supported any military action by a larger scale because they don't know enough about what's happening in Syria. There's massacres that are being committed every day.
But Hayvi, let me just interrupt you a moment. I understand your frustration with the Assad regime, but let me ask you to take this opportunity to actually put a point or ask a question to a government advisor. I know you want to make general points about your frustration, but is there something specific you would like to ask him?
I want to ask him about the lies that he's saying they are lies. Well, first of all, why doesn't the Syrian regime allow the international media to go into Syria? And why didn't allow the committee from the United Nations to go into the sites of the chemical weapons attack immediately? And why is it okay for him, since he's a Syrian nationalist, to have Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah kill and bomb and help in destroying Syria for the last 2.5 years?
Okay, well, there's a number of points there. We should point out that our Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen, is reporting in Damascus at the moment. But, sir, what about your relationship with Hezbollah and with Iran? Do you think that is a positive relationship?
I want to ask her what is the relation between opposition and Saudi Arabia, which is a dictatorship regime. If Saudi Arabia will support and Qatar will support the democracy in Syria, I think you should go to another way, first of all. Secondly, we open our country to all, I think BBC he is reporting from Damascus, and we had many foreign correspondents. The third thing that Syrian government invited United Nations Committee, you should know, and we didn't delay anything. This is, they are lying in Washington because after the assistant of Mr. Ban Ki-moon arrived to Damascus, after 2 days they go to Ghouta. But the main question, nobody talk about Khan al-Assad, which everyone knows that this chemical attack was from Al-Qaeda. If you are supporting Qaeda, it means you should support this attack. This attack will benefit only Al-Qaeda groups who, from CIA, they said many times that the core power who are fighting in Syria, they are Al-Qaeda.
So, just to be clear, you continue the accusation that it was opponents of President Assad who carried out this attack. It's worth reiterating, and you can see this on the BBC News website, the intelligence advice given to Prime Minister David Cameron concluded not that they could be sure that the Assad regime carried out that alleged chemical weapons attack, but they could be sure that the opposition wasn't able to carry it out. And by that, they said, in that case, it's very, very likely the regime carried out that attack. We're expecting more news on the US intelligence assessment as well in the next few hours. Of course, we'll bring that to you here on the BBC. Hayvi, for the moment in Washington, D.C., Bsam Abu Abdullah in Damascus, thank you very much indeed for your time. Sometimes you can really tell that an issue is touching a nerve. I get a list of countries, places where we're hearing from here, brought up on my computer, and I'm just looking at here. We've heard from South Africa, Jamaica, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Uganda, Israel, Libya, France, Finland. The list goes on and on and on. Thank you very much for your comments. We'll get more of them into the conversation in a couple of minutes' time.
No, I talking about it.
checkpoint, but let me say something.
Welcome to the world's newsroom, where our journalists are helping to transform our programmes. We're talking to people who know the stories better than anyone in the world.
There is a big divide on what's happening in Syria, around the Middle East, and you feel that on the social media, for example.
Almost 40% of Spanish live in regions where Spanish is not the only language. There are bilingual regions.
What's happening in Pakistan now is that many of these newspaper owners, they also launched their own TV channels because, as I said, that's where the money was. So it's interesting. Newspapers are declining, but journalism, as always, is very boisterous in Pakistan.
70% of Nigerians access the internet on mobile.
The World's Newsroom, every day on BBC World News.
No, I talking about it. Checkpoint, but let me say something.
Hi, I'm Ros Atkins. Welcome back to World Have Your Say. Of course, we're talking about the situation in Syria and how the international community may respond. And one way that lots of you contribute to World Have Your Say is by uploading videos. You can do that through worldhaveyoursay.com right now. In fact, any time that you choose. People also send in videos to our colleagues at BBC Arabic. And the next thing I want us to look at is this. It's from Tariq, who's in Suwaida, which is in southwestern Syria. Let's see what he has said to the BBC.
I don't think that people fear a military strike against Syria. Syrians have got used to killing and destruction for more than 2 years, and I don't think this strike can do more. The Syrian people are more afraid of the reaction from the regime rather than the strike itself. Syrians always compare the situation now to what happened with Iraq and Libya. They feel that foreign intervention is already happening through Russia and Iran. If the strike happens, it could have a positive or negative impact on the regime, but it will definitely have a negative impact on the revolution. I think the ultimate goal from the strike is to force the regime to accept that they must negotiate, but it will not be easy. The Syrian revolution goals are the right to freedom, and this will never happen without a peaceful revolution. Otherwise, we will be destroyed.
Well, Tariq, thank you very much indeed for sending that video into BBC Arabic. Let's put one of those points immediately to our guest in Damascus, Bsam Abu Abdullah, who's a government advisor. Tariq was expressing concern about how the Syrian government would respond if America, for instance, carries out airstrikes. How would you advise the government to respond if there is an attack?
I am not a military advisor, and first of all. Secondly, I am not speaking here on behalf of the Syrian government. I am academic at the same time.
I didn't say you were speaking on behalf of the government. I was saying, what would you advise the government to do? How best to respond to a military intervention?
It depends how the attack will be, but I think I adopt that there is an attack, first of all. Secondly, we are preparing for all options. Third of all, I think at that time we can speak, because it's better not to talk now what is the response, but I think that they will see something which is a lot of surprises. We will defend our country, our homeland, who are sitting in Washington or in Berlin. We are sitting here in Damascus with our people, with our army. We will defend our country absolutely.
Bsam Abu Abdullah, thank you very much indeed. We've got to let you go because our broadcast window, being able to connect to the studio, is just about up. Thank you very much for being on World Have Your Say. Perhaps we can invite you back on another time. Now, more comments are coming in from Zambia, Cameroon, Bangladesh, Singapore, Somalia, the US, Slovenia, Malawi. Thank you very much. I do have one specific question for you. How did you react to that vote from British MPs? In the last 15 years, almost every time, the West has militarily intervened, the UK has been involved. It probably won't be this time. A big shift for Britain in its approach. Do you approve of it? do you think Britain is letting Syrians down? Do let us know. The hashtag is WHYS. Let's go back to the three guests that we started with in Washington, D.C., Manchester and Moscow. Natalia, let me ask you, the government there has consistently said, let's not intervene with military force. So what is the alternative? What do you think could bring an end to this conflict?
Well, the alternative, as expressed by the Kremlin, is that there has to be a political solution of some sort. The Kremlin's position is very simple. They don't believe that outside regime change is acceptable. Speaking personally, I honestly don't know at this time. I mean, what we're seeing is a civil war, and civil wars don't tend to end until both sides are willing to kind of, work it out. And I'm not seeing that right now. I'm seeing that this will continue.
Thank you very much indeed. John's just called us from the US to say we should not be involved in this. This is for the locals to sort out. Let Jordan and Turkey deal with the problem. Shimshon rang from Israel. Both sides are killing each other. I'm wondering why the world is silent. Well, it's not silent, but it's action that some of you are demanding. And Dave in the UK has just called to say Syria is confronting a foreign conspiracy. Stop interfering in Syrian affairs. Well, let's continue to get a Russian perspective. We heard from Natalia there. Let's go back into the world's newsroom with Lena Sinjab, normally in Damascus for the BBC. Chloe from World Have Your Say. And I can see Anya from BBC Russian too. Anya, I'm curious, does Russian public opinion stand in line with Vladimir Putin? Is he representing people's wishes?
Is Vladimir Putin's view on the situation in Syria reflected amongst your audience?
Definitely. It always has been during the entire conflict. But today, surprisingly, after the vote by the British Parliament, there's been quite a few comments coming in support of Britain, in support of the decision that the Parliament has taken against the Syria action. And there are actually two interesting aspects about it. First of all, people are pleasantly surprised that Britain is, and I'm quoting quite a lot of members of the audience here, is not doing what the United States of America dictates. And the second aspect is that the Parliament in Britain voted against the government, against David Cameron's suggestion. And here is one comment I wanted to quote. This is a no-pet Parliament which can have a mind of its own, says one user on our Facebook page. And I'd love to see Russia's Duma, Russian government, Russian Parliament doing exactly that, going against the will of the president. And there are quite a lot of messages similar to that coming into our website. And another thing people are talking about on our pages is what's going to happen now. And the most repeated view is that the US is going to proceed with their plans. No matter of how much support from anyone else is going to get, and also without any convincing evidence, our audience think.
So that's interesting. So your audience are thinking firmly that the US will get involved, maybe with the help of Turkey and France. You were talking earlier, Lena, about how many Syrians do feel let down by the situation. Do they believe that military action will come in the form of the US or France at some point?
There is a general sense that amongst Syrians, whether opposition or loyalists, that there is actually a strike that will happen. Most likely will be a US-led strike. Again, I would stress here that the views are split. The loyalists to President Assad are not accepting this, and they see it as an aggression against a president who opposes Israel, while the opposition are seeing it as a help and a solution for an ongoing violence practiced by the government on the Syrians for the last 2 years.
And it's interesting the difference in views. I know, Anya, you were saying off air as well that many Russians see this as a US dominance, US trying to take over the world, and it's actually Russia who's the knight in shining armour coming to save the Syrians.
Yeah, Lena, thank you very much indeed for the moment. Live with us from the world's news. A reminder that if you're watching, you can tweet in response to everything that you're hearing. WHYS is the hashtag. Now, let me pull up a comment here from a Turkish newspaper called Radikal. Let me just show you this on the screen here. The coalition just got difficult. The three-party coalition getting ready for an intervention in Syria is crumbling. And, well, we could say that certainly the expected coalition between the UK and the US is certainly in trouble. Let's go back to our guest in the north of England who is joining us. Do you think that in terms of military action now, that you could still have a coalition, the US, France, Turkey, it could still work?
I mean, I think what they've got to look at and what's in the interest of the Syrian people, they've got to put aside what's happened last night. Obviously, that's a matter now for the UK to consider and see whether it is feasible for them to go ahead with some outcomes. Because I think whether we were going to intervene ourselves in the UK, we always had to look at what we were looking to achieve.
Well, Tara, I'm going to jump in here. We're going to get a couple of other people here in Britain to talk with you here on World Have Your Say in a couple of minutes' time. And, of course, those of you watching, we're live, so if you've got points to put to our British guests, by all means, get in touch. WHYS is the hashtag. Speak to you very, very shortly.
Let's just say something.
Hello there. Intense late summer heat continues across many parts of the US. Our temperature chart shows deep orange and red colours extending across many central parts up as far as the upper Midwest, and also still very warm and hot across California, where those wildfires are continuing. Some rain working into British Columbia, the far northwest of the US. Some showers for the southwest, but many areas here sunny with temperatures up into the high 30s. Now, through Central America, Tropical Storm Juliet has brought some problems across Mexico. It's brought some flooding. That now clearing away. But having said that, still plenty of heavy showers affecting much of Central America, and some showers too through the Amazon basin. Further south for much of Chile and Argentina, it looks fine, and actually really warm as well. Temperatures into the mid-20s, quite a long way south. Temperatures here actually above where we'd expect them for the time of year. It's only really across the far south of Chile and Argentina that the cold air holds on. Looking further ahead into Saturday, few showers for Denver. Looks fine for LA. In Bogota and Lima, it'll be cloudy, but we'll see some sunshine in La Paz. Plenty more details on the world weather are always available on our website.
Destination Arctic Circle.
Look, there's an animal, there's a moose.
Continue straight into the horrifying blizzard.
Oh, you can have floods and avalanches in the same day.
Take the next exit when visible.
I can't see where I'm going. Let me drive quickly, Sue. You cannot stop here, Sue.
After the deadly oncoming trucks. Take the second left.
Probably the most treacherous road you're going to find.
Turn around when possible. You have not reached your destination.
World's most dangerous roads. This weekend on BBC World News.
Let me tell you a story crafted by nature, a story of a beautiful forest protected by royalty, the incredible story of West Bengal. Come, be a part of my story.
I want to start by asking you about the big claims that you make for the power of the story, the ways in which books you think can change people and change people's lives. Where does that come from?
I think it comes from my own experience, really. You know, I do believe that books have helped me tremendously. Sometimes I think they saved me from so many things. And my main connection with the universe has always been via books, through books and stories. So when I say stories can change people's lives, I know that because they've changed mine.
You say that books saved you. There's a suggestion there that it was perilous in some way, or are you talking about it saving you intellectually?
I was a lonely child. I was raised by a single mother, a working mother, in 1970s in this middle-class Muslim neighborhood for a while, and then in Madrid when my mother started working as a diplomat. So on top of that, maybe loneliness, there was a sense of cultural alienation that came with me. And I was a child who spent lots of, hours on her own, and books really kept me together, kept my pieces together, and gave me a sense of continuity in life, which I was lacking.
Coming up on Focus on Africa, M23 rebels in the eastern DRC say they are declaring a unilateral ceasefire to give peace a chance. But is peace a real possibility? And a different way of tackling mental health problems. We meet the Canadian psychologist offering online counseling in Chad. Join me for Focus on Africa.
Welcome back to World Have Your Say. And as you'd expect, we're talking about the situation in Syria and the response to it. Now, it's absolutely fascinating seeing all of the different places where you're getting in touch from. Zambia, Cameroon, Bangladesh, Slovenia, Malawi, Gambia, Sierra Leone, Germany, India, the Netherlands. And what I'm interested to hear from you is that, of course, the vast majority of those countries, the vast majority of all the countries in the world, have got no intention of taking any military action in Syria. So why is Britain getting so much criticism for doing the same as the vast majority of countries in the world? Tell me, is Britain a separate case, or does it not deserve the criticism that it's getting? Wherever you are, the contact details will be on the screen throughout the programme. We're on the WHYS hashtag. I'll get as many of your comments into the conversation as I can.
I experience. People are going to want to know.
Let's just say something.
Now, the morning papers here in Britain would not have made very pleasant reading for David Cameron. The word humiliation has popped up a great deal with regards to that vote that went against him in the House of Commons. But the Prime Minister's been out facing the media and giving interviews. Let's see a little bit of what he said in his first interview this morning.
Well, I think it's important we have a robust response to the use of chemical weapons. And there are a series of things that we will continue to do. We'll continue to take a case to the United Nations. We'll continue to work in all the organisations we're members of, whether the EU or NATO or the G8 or the G20, to condemn what's happened in Syria. It's important we uphold the international taboo on the use of chemical weapons. But one thing that was proposed, the potential, but only after another vote, involvement of British military in any action, that won't be happening. Now, that won't be happening because the British Parliament, reflecting, I think, the great scepticism of the British people about any involvement in the Middle East because of all the difficulties, and I understand that part of it won't be going ahead.
Does Prime Minister David Cameron? Well, let's hear some of the debate that's been happening here in Britain over that vote, which went against the Prime Minister's wishes. We've already met Tara. She's a political blogger in Manchester. She's still with us. Live with us from Brighton in the south of England is Sam Bullen. He's an international relations student, and I know that Sam and Tara have been talking with each other on Twitter already. And still with us in Washington, D.C. is Hayvi, who's a Syrian American. But Hayvi, if you don't mind, I'm going to concentrate on the other two just for a moment. Sam, did you welcome the vote from the MPs?
I did, really, because we have no plan in place, we have no objectives in place. We have really been told nothing about what British military involvement would be like. And if there is military involvement, how far would it go? What is the objectives of that involvement? Are we planning to change the regime? Are we just punishing the use of chemical weapons? It seems to be a complete lack of planning involved in this.
Tara?
I think last night we need to be clear that it wasn't about going and intervening straight away. It was a vote in principle, and actually we voted down that principle. So now we're effectively going into a negotiation where we're saying, well, it doesn't matter what happens in this negotiation, we're going to give in the end, which means that you don't really have any emphasis in the points that you're going to put across. So everything that's been said, that we should be looking for a political solution, that we should be looking to take Assad around the table and actually look at other options here, we can't do that if we don't have any emphasis to be able to get him to come there in the first place.
But military intervention, or a British use of military intervention, would never have a practical outcome. You couldn't force him to talk. There is no military solution to this.
I mean, I think you're right that you can't always force somebody to talk if they don't want to, but I think that we are setting a dangerous precedent that when somebody does use weapons like chemical weapons in Syria, which I'm fully in the belief that Assad has used them on numerous occasions, I think the evidence is a judgment call, but a judgment call that I would agree with.
Oh yeah, me too. Yeah.
That you have to react to that, that if dictators are able to hide behind the fog of war, and that they're able to hide around maybe the mistakes that we did make when it comes to Iraq, that it's going to be a free-for-all when it comes to internal conflicts on the use of horrendous methods to put down their own people.
So what would you say British military intervention should be like? Are we targeting the chemical weapons?
I mean, I think that, as I said, last night wasn't a vote to say that we were going to go and take military action straight away. It was about a response to the use of chemical weapons. It was a firm response and saying that, in principle, that if it's necessary, that is an action that we'll take. And actually, from an expert point of view, I believe that we do have a coalition that's led by Turkey. It isn't led by America. I think if we actually look at the wider picture, Turkey are very clear that they're leading on this issue, and they're closer than anyone. They've felt the biggest burden. They've taken in they've spent £1 billion and taken in refugees from Syria as a result of the conflict there. And actually, I'd take their advice and their leadership on this, rather than maybe some of the comments that were made by our MPs in Parliament, who were looking more at emails that they got from a handful of constituents rather than the bigger picture.
Well, I do agree, and I think that Turkey should play a very large role in the response to Syria. But surely, if military options aren't available, and clearly we voted that they weren't, shouldn't we be focusing on other ways of dealing with the situation, such as humanitarian relief to the countries that are taking in all these refugees?
I mean, I think that you're right that now it's off the table, I don't think that we should wash our hands of what's going on in Syria. I think that we should take the most robust response that we can based on the decision that was taken last night and give as much support as we can to our allies around the world to put pressure through the UN, through the various bodies that we're involved in internationally, to see if we can actually support in a humanitarian way the disaster that's actually taking place over in Syria.
And Tara and Sam, if you just let me interrupt you, it's fascinating listening to you talk. You're using this phrase, robust response. Actually, David Cameron has been quite clear since this vote, which seems to stand in the way of military intervention from Britain. He said he will continue to pursue a robust response to the situation in Syria. It's just that particular option isn't available to him. Lots of you are calling up to share your thoughts on this. Shimsarian in India says the US and the UK are always talking about intervention, but what would happen afterwards? Well, David Cameron made it quite clear that if these particular strikes had gone ahead, it was about being a deterrent for using chemical weapons, not about taking sides in the Syrian conflict. Jiranam calls us from Finland saying, why don't the Arab countries take the lead for once? We might get into that in a couple of minutes, Jiranam. Thanks for calling. And Manja in Singapore says the British decision is admirable. By voting this way, they have avoided another pointless war. Well, as I expect you know, the current government in Britain is a coalition government between David Cameron's Conservative Party and the Liberal Democrats. Let me just pull up a comment here from Andy Boddington. He's a blogger at Lib Dem Voice and writes, at long last, we, or at least our parliament, believe that we cannot bomb our way to peace. This could be the point where we believe our best interests lie in using our financial and political resources to promote a world that works without war. Do you think it's that significant, Tara? Do you think that this is a genuine realignment of how Britain attempts to contribute to the world?
To dichotomy to say that you do one or the other. I think that we should be using all the means possible to put an end to the conflict that's taking place in Syria and an end to what we saw on the TV after the vote last night with the release of pictures from the school that was terribly bombed, and you can't help but get emotional when you actually see what's taking place there. But yeah, I think that what took place last night is going to change Britain's place in the international community. People are going to take a different view when it comes to thinking, are the UK going to stand up to these atrocities, or actually they're going to sit back and let somebody else take the heavy work?
All right, Tara, thank you very much for your contributions for the moment. Thanks to Sam as well. Now, lots of you are saying, well, what on earth aren't the UK and the US and France getting involved in this anyway? Let Arab countries address the problems in Syria. Well, let's put that point to our next guest, Jamal Khashoggi, who's head of Arab News, the TV channel. Jamal, thank you for joining us. Do you think that Saudi Arabia may now take the lead in offering to intervene in Syria?
Taking the lead diplomatically, maybe, but not militarily. The situation in Syria is very difficult, particularly with the chemical weapon. And the Arab countries, regional power, including Turkey, cannot deal with chemical weapons. Americans have the experience of dealing with such a problem. And I don't think we want to see the region involved in a war using chemical weapons. The regime in Syria is of the thuggish type. It's a dictatorship. If Bashar have used chemical weapons, and he has used chemical weapons on his own people, I'm sure he will use them on Saudi Arabia or in Jordan if we start an operation against him.
But I'm interested to hear you say Saudi Arabia won't get involved militarily. It's already providing weapons to the opposition, isn't it?
No, I'm talking Saudi Arabia will not lead militarily, but we haven't heard yet from Saudi Arabia whether they will take part in the coalition, and probably they will. If there is a coalition led by the Americans and international powers, Saudi Arabia and some other countries might play a role there. We heard leaks of stories of Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries sending sorties of planes to Jordan. Most probably, I think there is a responsibility. Since we in Saudi Arabia were leading into an international intervention to end the misery of the Syrian people, we should play a role in a coalition to end the Assad regime.
Thank you very much. So that's a perspective from Saudi Arabia. Let's now get a perspective from Iran, because we can go back into the world's newsroom with Chloe, Lena Sinjab, who's normally our correspondent in Damascus but is in London at the moment, and also Rana Rahimpour from BBC Persian, who's now joining us. Rana, what are you hearing from your users at bbcpersian.com and your viewers as well? Do they approve of Iran's position on this conflict?
The viewers are quite divided, just like the rest of the world. Last night, although it was 2 o'clock local time, many people were still online waiting for the UK Parliament to decide about this motion. And when they heard that the motion was rejected, there were many people who said they were happy, but then on the other side there were people who said that Assad should face the consequences of his alleged decisions. So they are quite divided. But the Iranian government has been very cautious. Today there has been no comments about it at all. It might be because it's Friday and it's the weekend, and we might get more reactions from Iranian leadership tomorrow.
And it's interesting, Lena, we were talking about how Syrians are responding to this strike. You said a little bit earlier on there's a real feeling that these strikes will happen, whether it's led by the Americans and whether other countries would be involved. Tell me what Syrians are telling you about how they're preparing for possible strikes on their country.
Well, first of all, there are big numbers of Syrians are fleeing the country and leaving across the border from different directions. But as many people know that the supposed strike or the possible strike might take place in Damascus or around Damascus on military base there. So many people are who stayed in Damascus can't leave or just wanted to stay there. They're storing food and buying food, but otherwise there is a strange sense in the capital that life seems to be going on without a great sense of panic, because people have got used to the shelling, have got used to mortars, have got used to Scud missiles, and somehow at this time they feel that this is only going to target a military base, and the ones who are not close to them are less stressed or less worried than the ones who are close to them. But in general, there is a sense amongst Syrians that they've got used to this, and I quote someone who told me, we're not afraid of death, we are waiting for death, we would just want to get over with all this, we're used to this.
Lena, Chloe and Rana, thank you very much indeed. I'll leave you to carry on talking. Perhaps we'll be able to come back to you before the end of the programme. Alec in the US has just called up to say what Britain did, it had a public vote. If you did the same thing here, the result would be the same thing. Jerome in Trinidad says the UN has to take a lead role. Problem is, with the UN, the Security Council just can't agree. Russia and China want completely different things to the UK and the US. And Ramiro in Peru just tweeted us saying, this is not a British exercise of democracy. Men and women and children are dying in Syria because of one man's ambition. Thank you very much indeed. All your tweets coming in on WHYS, the hashtag. We'll get more of those in a couple of minutes. Just got a short break, then we'll carry on our conversation.
No, I talking about it. Let me say something.
Hello, welcome to Football Focus. We are officially on tour. You may well recognise this place. Look at this. Welcome to Barcelona.
Hola, soy Andrés Iniesta. You're watching Football Focus.
Not a bad stadium, is it? I'm joined by a true legend of the game in the studio today, Ian Rush. I'm sure you recognise Didi Hamann, a stalwart of this programme. The hand of experience, Mr. Mark Lawrenson, is with us today. It's the power of football. What a delight. We have the Liverpool legend Robbie Fowler with us today. Fabrice Muamba, delighted to have you on the programme. We have a man known in Ireland as Zinedine Kilban. It's been a fairly dramatic week
I just didn't have a break for years and years and years.
At the moment, I can guarantee you, no.
We have a really good team, one of the best in the history of the club.
As each year goes along, I get older, and it's a fact of life. I can't avoid that. The emotion makes the difference.
A difficult decision, but I think that I made the right one.
It would have been nice to stay in the Premier League, but things don't last forever.
Unfortunately enough, it doesn't always work like that.
That is the magic of Football Focus.
This is the story of a weapon of war, deadly yet elegant, which lay for 70 years at the bottom of the English Channel. It's the story of the man who flew it and fought it, and of the experts who battled the effects of time and the English weather to raise it from the seabed.
Here in Damascus, people are going about their daily business, but there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of apprehension about what might happen if the Americans, the British and the French launch some sort of attack. One fear is about what might happen if chemical weapon sites were attacked by cruise missiles or by airstrikes.
Coming up on Focus on Africa, M23 rebels in the eastern DRC say they are declaring a unilateral ceasefire to give peace a chance. But is peace a real possibility? And a different way of tackling mental health problems. We meet the Canadian psychologist offering online counseling in Chad. Join me for Focus on Africa.
No, I talking about it.
Let me say something.
Welcome back to World Have Your Say. We're talking about Syria and that extraordinary vote in the British Parliament yesterday where a block was put on any possible military intervention in Syria by Britain. It should be emphasised that the US and France are both saying they remain open to that idea. Turkey has been keen on it for several days. Germany, though, has made it clear it will not be involved in any military intervention. Sam's just called up from Boston. Hi, Sam. Thanks for taking part, saying bravo to Britain. This shows that the people have spoken in Parliament. And Tanvir in London tweets, as several of you have made this point, saying, why are we only talking about innocent people dying in Syria? How about talking about the US killing innocent people in Iraq, Afghanistan and Pakistan? Well, let's go back to three of our guests for the last stretch of the programme. We still have with us Jamal Khashoggi from Arab News. He's live with us from Bahrain. Hayvi Bouzo is a Syrian-American activist. She'll be with us in just a moment. And we're going to be speaking to Natalia Antonova, who is from the Moscow News English language website. All of you, thank you very much indeed. Let me start with you, Jamal. Let me ask you, if the US decides against military action, what other options does it have?
Then we'll just have a serious, continuous civil war, and Bashar continue of killing his own people, and eventually he will win. But he will win over a broken down Syria, a broken people, and that is not a recipe for peace in the long term in the area.
So you sound like you've given up on a diplomatic solution, at least at the moment. Natalia in Moscow, do you believe it's still possible after 2 years of war that diplomacy could resolve this?
Well, honestly, I don't know. I mean, I think you have to be realistic about what kind of man Bashar Assad appears to be. I'm also not entirely sure that, an outside force coming in and trying to kind of surgically fix things is really going to work. I mean, I think in the long run, either way you look at it, in the long run, we're looking at a lot of violence and a lot of death, I'm sorry to say.
Hayvi, before I come to you, let me just quickly play everyone watching a video. This is from Omar, and he uploaded this through worldhaveyousay.com.
Omar Al-Asil, Syrian non-violence movement from the UK. It's very difficult for me to be inclined to support the military intervention in Syria, but at the same time I feel it's the only option left to help Syrian civilians. In both cases, Syrian people will be the biggest loser, in my opinion, because if the strike happens, then the regime will shell his people in revenge of that. And if it doesn't happen, then he will be convinced that the world is not willing to do anything to stop him. Those who are not in favor of the military intervention have a huge responsibility now to help Syrian civilians. By all means, we should not stop and watch, we should not stand by, we should do something. It is time to do something to help Syrian civilians.
Omar, thank you very much indeed for uploading it. You could tell by the red buses that he is a Syrian living in London. Let's bring in Hayvi, who's a Syrian American in Washington, D.C. It's been interesting, Hayvi, how many Syrians have said to us they don't fear the military action, they fear what will happen afterwards. They fear how the regime will respond.
Well, the regime really cannot respond any more than he is already for the last 2.5 years. I actually want to make a few points very clear. First of all, I don't believe that civil war is the right term to what's happening in Syria. I think there's a revolution in Syria against a bloody dictatorship, and there's a genocide that's been committed against the Syrian people for the last 2.5 years. The Syrian regime have used all the weapons that they have, and they will continue to use them. And we, as international civilized community, we have a moral responsibility to step in and help those people. And I think we should stop comparing Syria to Iraq and probably start comparing it to Bosnia and what the world did there and how they saved the lives of millions of people. And the same thing, remember Rwanda, and how until today we regret the fact that the world did not intervene in the right time and they did not save the people's life there. And I just believe that it's our moral responsibility. And I agree with Prime Minister.
It's interesting you say there's a moral responsibility to act. We've seen some columnists arguing much the same thing. I think the big debate that people are having, and when we talk about Kosovo in 1999, there's still an argument going on, whether that intervention actually helped save people's lives or made the situation worse. Thank you very much to all three of you, live from Washington, D.C., from Bahrain and from Moscow. Chloe is going to be talking about this further on BBC World Service Radio with World Have Your Say. That's on air in just over an hour's time, so you can tune in for that. I'll speak to you next week. Thanks for your company. Bye-bye.
Let's just say something.
Out on the festival circuit, 3 new documentaries focusing on the plight of gay people in Africa have been making their presence felt, as well as in cinemas. God Loves Uganda explores the role that conservative American evangelicals may have had in fomenting anti-gay sentiment in Uganda.
This is the real thing, we're not pretending.
The documentary Call Me Kuchu focuses in part on David Kato, described as the first openly gay man in Uganda, who was bludgeoned to death. And Born This Way looks at the challenges confronting gay people in Cameroon. The faces of some of the participants have been obscured in promotional clips because they could suffer in Cameroon if it was known they were gay.
The subjects of the film asked us not to show it in Cameroon. Things are really bad for gay people in Cameroon. It's when people are outed, they rarely choose to come out. It's very common to lose your job, to be cut off by your family completely, and to be driven out of your neighborhood and your apartment if you're renting.
Friends may leave you, parents may leave you, family may leave you, but you stay with your strength.
The presence of 3 films on gays in Africa has come about partly because the growing activism of gay people fighting back against persecution caught the attention of filmmakers.
It's really actually quite exciting, I think, to be part of this zeitgeist of films exploring these issues in Africa. There's a surge of energy around this topic that I think is awakening at least the Western consciousness to what the struggle is and the intensity of the struggle in Africa.
The men and women who've made these documentaries are all outsiders, but they've tried to have the narrative come from their African subjects.
I think one thing that was really important to us was that the story we were telling was being told in the words of the activists on the ground. And so that happened both by following them and letting them tell their stories, and also using the advice of members of the community who would point us in the direction of some of the most crucial stories they thought needed to be told.
In the film Call Me Kuchu, a lot of the focus is on a group of men and women working to defeat Uganda's anti-homosexuality bill, which had proposed the death penalty for sexually active HIV-positive gay men. Both Call Me Kuchu and God Loves Uganda look at the role of American conservative evangelicals in Uganda. The evangelicals see themselves as following the word of God.
The law says no homosexuality in this nation. God, it's an abomination to God.
But the filmmakers take a different view. They see the evangelicals as fueling gay hatred.
American evangelicals have gone to Uganda and essentially influenced the religious leaders and members of parliament who were responsible for the anti-homosexuality bill.
C'est pas facile, hein? C'est pas facile.
The aim of these films is also to show individuals on the ground in Africa helping gay men and women. Among the subjects in Born This Way is a human rights lawyer who fights for the rights of gay people. She believes the documentary will never be shown in Cameroon, but that it might have an impact.
If people around the world knows about this, maybe they can do something to make our president know that this is not acceptable in this century. This cannot be acceptable.
One strength of these films is that although they depict incidents of abuse and violence, the gay people who are featured are not presented as helpless victims. The filmmakers have let them emerge as fully human, strong individuals, people who are standing up for themselves and, in some instances, becoming part of a growing activist community.
But we are all one in Christ.
Please visit our website at bbc.com/Talking Movies.
Let me tell you a story brought to life through faith. A story vibrating with rhythm, celebrating the victory of good over evil. The incredible story of West Bengal. Come, be a part of my story.
Hello there. Intense late summer heat is returning to the US Midwest as we head through the next few days. Have a look at Friday's temperature chart through central parts of the states. These deep red colours extending quite a long way north, actually, showing temperatures up into the high 30s, even low 40s in places. Some spots could nudge 100 Fahrenheit with plenty of sunshine. There will be some heavy showers too, running through the Great Lakes, affecting some southeastern areas of Canada, perhaps swinging into New England by the end of the day as well. And the risk of some heavy showers and thunderstorms stretches down from parts of the Midwest down through towards the Florida Keys. Inland, Dallas, 38 degrees, feeling hot. Few showers across the southwest, but should be dry across California. Not much relief for the wildfires which continue there. In Denver, we could see some heavy thundery downpours, but temperatures well up into the mid-30s. Houston, Texas stays dry and stays hot as well. Now, Tropical Storm Juliet is pulling away from Mexico. It's wreaked some havoc. It's brought some flooding in places, is now clearing, so things are improving here, although there will still be some further very heavy showers at times during the day on Friday. Some particularly heavy ones actually pushing in through the Yucatan Peninsula. Quite breezy, quite windy actually where we have these showers, and a scattering of showers further south as well. Some particularly heavy ones for Costa Rica and Panama. Temperatures there in Kingston, Jamaica, 30 degrees, a mixture of sunshine and showers. Now, for South America, warm conditions extending quite a long way south, further south than we'd expect, certainly into central parts of Argentina, with some sunshine as well. So here we'll see temperatures easily up into the mid-20s, above where they should be at this time of year. Further south, well, this is where the cold air is holding on. Across the far south of Chile and Argentina, temperatures struggling into low single figures. There'll be some rain at times as well. Stays warm in places like Buenos Aires as we head through into Saturday as well. In Santiago, things dry up by the weekend, and they begin to warm up just a little bit as well.
Large trade gap, currency crisis and slowing investments. As India's growth figures for April to June this year are revealed, we look at what's leaving the once booming economy gasping for breath. For that and more, join me, Yogita Limai, on this Sunday's India Business Report, only on BBC World News.
Coming up on Focus on Africa, M23 rebels in the eastern DRC say they are declaring a unilateral ceasefire to give peace a chance. But is peace a real possibility? And a different way of tackling mental health problems. We meet the Canadian psychologist offering online counseling in Chad. Join me for Focus on Africa.